Someone making Prince William's youngest son weep in Balmoral was the catalyst for what amounted to a stealthy coup inside Buckingham Palace last week, and I'm not talking about a minor sneeze or a scratched knee. We are discussing a planned, brutal verbal assault on a youngster that was so severe that staff personnel who saw it described the remarks as incredibly cruel and purposefully damaging. That is an exact quote from those who were present. What's even more bizarre is that this wasn't a stranger or random visitor on the property. The blended family itself was the source of this. Young Prince Louis was supposedly contacted by Queen Camilla's granddaughter. Furthermore, what she said wasn't just cruel. They were meticulously engineered to strike the most excruciating targets possible. We've been informed that Louis wasn't the only target of the insults. They pursued Catherine, his mother. They then traveled to an even darker location. They drew parallels to the tragic and convoluted tale of Princess Diana, his late grandmother. Now, a youngster of Prince Louis's age might not be able to fully understand the context of those allusions, but he was perfectly aware of the poison they contained. Witnesses claim that he fully collapsed. The sound of a youngster in real distress broke the calm of the Scottish Highlands as he ran to his mother, crying and trembling. However, this is when the narrative changes that I really can't stop thinking about. The workforce was not frozen in place by Louis Wiss's tears, it was the face of Catherine. She refrained from screaming, she didn't charge in and demand explanations. She did not act in any way that one could anticipate from a mother who merely witnessed her child being emotionally taken advantage of. Witnesses described something far more disturbing. The air seemed to drop 10 degrees around her because of the unwavering control and chilly, set expression on her face. It wasn't the lack of feeling that was concerning, according to someone in the vicinity. It was the existence of something much more powerful that was being deliberately suppressed. To be honest, that detail provides all the information you need to understand what transpired next. Because although Catherine didn't react right away, she did react. She simply did it in private, away from everyone, during a chat with her husband that palace insiders are now referring to as the pivotal point in the whole affair. Before I delve into what she actually said to William and how it resulted in the so-called eraser mandate, I would want to briefly mention that if you're enjoying this analysis, please click the subscribe button and join us at Crown Watch. We examine these tales in a manner that genuinely clarifies the dynamics of the palace. Alright, let's get back to it. Catherine and William therefore had a private discussion within Balmoral following the event. Furthermore, this was not a light-hearted discussion about parental annoyances. Numerous sources claim that the encounter, which was silent, tense, and emotionally charged, significantly changed the monarchy's power dynamics. And it's quite amazing how Catherine handled it. She didn't confront William directly since she was upset about what had happened to their son. She attacked him with a far more potent weapon. She mentioned his mum. With what insiders call unblinking and uncompromising directness, she turned to face her husband and outlined the monarchy's complete failure to safeguard Princess Diana. She discussed how Diana's harassment wasn't limited to the media. Her entire tenure within the royal fold was characterized by personal conflict and institutional indifference. Catherine then clarified the relationship. In essence, she informed William that she would not let history repeat itself with her offspring, not Charlotte, not George, and most definitely not Louis. She made it plain that she would do everything it takes to protect them from the mental stress and psychological warfare that ruined William's own adolescent. The problem is that this was more than just a woman voicing her worries. This was a key that unlocks what William has spent his whole adult life attempting to compartmentalize, according to those with close knowledge of their connection. For William, the breakdown of his parents' marriage, the whispered arguments, the tension that never quite subsided, and finally the terrible death of his mother are more than just memories. They are the fundamental components of his identity. They are with him every day. And when Catherine publicly expressed his greatest dread, the situation transformed from a single hurtful remark from a step relative to a terrifying picture of a future he had vowed to stop. He feels that his mother's death was caused by the subtle accumulation of the same dynastic pressures and the same careless disregard for mental health. In a family power struggle, his own children are being utilized as collateral damage or pawns, and others who are close to William claim that's when everything came together. The long-standing royal tendency to keep quiet and the never complain, never explain maxim, which had served as the family's survival strategy for many generations, suddenly appeared to be both insufficient and actively harmful. It was no longer neutral to do nothing. It was collusion, and now he was calling in the silent vow he had made to himself as a boy to change things. Kensington Palace felt different the very next morning. Employees described it as stalely rather than frightened. An intentional feeling of purpose pervaded the atmosphere. Senior aides were called to a meeting that was held behind closed doors. There were restrictions on movement in several areas of the palace. Communication channels were kept under constant observation. According to some stories, some people even had their personal mobile devices temporarily removed. If this is accurate, it shows how severe the situation was. This was not a public statement preparation. This was a prelude to an internal conflict. Senior protocol officials, constitutional law specialists, and legal advisors were discreetly brought in. It was surprised that they were there, and only a very limited group of people knew why. Additionally, insiders claim that William didn't appear to be a distressed father when he entered that meeting room. He had a commanding appearance. He was carrying a whole briefing booklet, and the contents were an unambiguous, methodical, and utterly brutal reaction to what had transpired. It wasn't an emotional outburst. The goal of this clinical approach was to surgically cut off Queen Camilla's extended family from any ties to the monarchy's ceremonial and official life. Every potential public visible channel was investigated, evaluated, and methodically removed. There will be no more invitations to state banquets. Appearances on the balcony of Buckingham Palace are always off the table. Traditional ceremonial practices are no longer practiced. Any obligations pertaining to public participation fulfilled, symbolic roles, and even the smallest honorary appearances were being eliminated. And palace officials began using a word that is quite terrifying in its corporate precision when discussing this internal command. It was dubbed the eraser mandate. The speed, accuracy, and overall nature of what was happening are all conveyed by the name. The fact that many long-serving orders weren't necessarily unhappy with the choice itself is also noteworthy. The way William carried it out unnerved them. His voice was never elevated. Clear instructions and non-negotiable conclusions were delivered with total serenity. There was no outward display of rage or discontent, and in fact, the entire situation seemed more severe and long-lasting because of that cold, calculating approach. Anger finally burns away. This was a very different matter. It was permafrost. The employees responsible for carrying out the directives realized right away that this was not a temporary fix to ease her emotions. The individual who will eventually oversee the entire organization imposed this long-term strategic realignment. Even the most seasoned courtiers at Buckingham Palace were actually taken aback by this portion. William did not seek his father's approval. The king was not consulted by him. He didn't set up a meeting to talk about it or ask for permission. He simply started the machinery of his own Kensington Palace home by immediately implementing the complete rubber mandate. It wasn't until the decision was taken, the instructions were issued, and the new reality was established that King Charles was formally informed. The correspondence took the shape of an official letter. The tone was noted as being extremely controlled and courteous, adhering to all the honorifics and loyal gestures that are necessary while speaking to the sovereign. However, the content was unquestionable. This wasn't a suggestion, it wasn't an appeal for advice. It was both an announcement of a choice that had already been made in full and a declaration of reality. There was no room for discussion, according to one source with knowledge of the circumstances. Before the king even realized the issue was on the table, the door to negotiation or reversal had been slammed shut and bolted, and you have to imagine Charles's reaction to the letter. Suddenly, he found himself in a precarious situation between his heir, who was exercising power in a manner that had practically never been seen in the modern monarchy, and his wife, whose family had just been publicly and irrevocably degraded. When Queen Camilla learned of the decision, she reportedly became enraged. She contended that the ruling directly challenged both the king's personal authority and the established royal institution. In order to restore the established hierarchy, she urged Charles to step in right now and veto his son. Additionally, there were some brief but intense conversations taking place during this time, according to palace rumors. Charles, however, did not do it. He didn't step in, he didn't challenge the order. He didn't even try to become involved. Additionally, many close to the king claim that a complex combination of events led to his decision. He is a guy burdened by his own recent health issues, as well as a profound exhaustion from the ongoing strains the family has endured in recent years. The continued Andrew crisis, Harry's departure, and the constant public scrutiny. On a deeper level, however, many think Charles made a calculation that was icy realistic. He recognized something that had been subtly coming to the institution's attention for some time. He is no longer the monarchy's sole emotional and practical center of gravity. There has been a clear and consistent change in favor of William and Catherine. The public has a great deal of affection for them. They stand for steadiness. They are the future king's parents. They represent the public's aspirations for the future of the monarchy. Charles had very little chance of winning an open power battle with his son over this specific topic, either inside the organization or in the eyes of the public. In a sense, his passivity was an implicit acceptance of this new reality. The stealthy coup his son had just carried out received a hushed green light. Not only has the power dynamic changed, but it has been drastically and irreversibly altered. You must comprehend the stress that had been developing for months prior to the Balmoral event in order to comprehend why this is so important. One of the most challenging and drawn-out PR initiatives in contemporary royal history was the assimilation of Camilla Parker BS into the royal family. It required decades of cautious management and gradual public exposure to get from being referred to as the third person in a fairy tale marriage to being offered the title of Queen Consort. Integrating her own family, Tom Parker BS, Laura Lopes and their offspring, into the larger royal network was a crucial component of that plan. Making her family visible was intended to normalize her presence. The appearances were cautiously controlled and infrequent at first, but they eventually got more frequent. Family gatherings, official photos, and the Buckingham Palace balcony for significant national events all gave the impression of a contemporary blended royal family, which the general public likely perceived as coziness and solidarity. However, because visibility is closely associated with rank in the realm of monarchy, certain long-serving officials and conventional quarters were becoming more and more concerned behind the scenes. Furthermore, it was becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish between being a member of the Queen Consort's personal family and having quasi-official status inside the organization. What had begun as a courtesy was starting to resemble an expectation. And that led to a subtle but enduring conflict over a basic issue. In reality, who should be at the center of this organization? Fundamentally, the monarchy is a blood dynasty. Although a consort may be crowned, her family is not entitled to succession or a constitutional role. This tension was not brought on by the Balmoral incident, it exploded. It was the spark that ignited a volcano of worries about access, power, and the crown's long-term course. Therefore, William's rubber mandate was more than just a penalty for a single hurtful remark. A conflict that had been shouldering for years came to a harsh and final end, and there was an instant understanding within the palace. The days of the Parker Bull were over, the totally blended crown experiment had not worked. Following this, the palace system saw the emergence of two separate and increasingly independent courts, the Prince and Princess of Wales's court at Kensington and Windsor, as well as the King and Queen's court at Buckingham Palace, started making the necessary adjustments. Staff members are always acutely aware of the subtle currents of power. Allegiances changed noticeably but nearly imperceptibly. It was clearly obvious that Wales would be in charge moving forward. They envisioned the monarchy as a narrowly focused system that was solely concerned with the direct line of succession. Charles had promoted the idea of a large, welcoming family, but times had changed. The Windsor core was at the center of a leaner, more cautious, fiercely defensive future. Interestingly, many who have been closely observing William over the years weren't surprised by his unwavering and decisive stance. He and Catherine have done a fantastic job of portraying a contemporary, approachable picture of royalty, the commitment to family values, the support of mental health, and the active parenting. By coming across as more sympathetic, emotionally astute, and aware of everyday life than any previous generation, they established a vast foundation of public trust. However, many who work in the palace have always recognized that William had more to him than his meticulously crafted public persona. They portray a man who, in private, is tough, passionately protective, and has an unwavering sense of seriousness about his duties, and most importantly, his family. He finds it difficult to forget or forgive behaviors that he deems offensive or harmful, particularly when they are aimed at his wife or kids. During times of crisis, the public image of contemplative introspection is replaced by an interior reality of quiet intensity and the readiness to make difficult, even unpopular choices. These two incarnations of William came together to form one at Balmoral. The future king and the relatable father are one and the same. And it served as a sneak peek into the type of monarch he hopes to become. He will not simply carry on his father's or grandmother's legacy. It will function according to a new set of non-negotiable standards, the most crucial of which is the total preservation of his family's mental and physical health. The public's response was immediate and overwhelming when they learned of the repercussions. On social media, support for William and Catherine increased dramatically. A clear emotional connection between the past and the present was made when old photos of Princess Diana violently defending her young sons from paparazzi surfaced and went viral. The story was no longer one of royal intrigue. It told the story of a son who would not let his own children to go through what he had. It was a story about parental love and ending trauma cycles that was personal and emotionally stirring. And William received a huge mandate as a result of that surge of public support. No one ever walked back, changed his order, or even truly questioned it. It doesn't move or change, it stays where it is. With flawless clarity, the word has been transmitted across the organization and into the outside world. The emotional well-being of the royal children will take precedence over all other considerations throughout King William's reign, including familial ties, internal politics, and centuries of royal customs and hierarchy. And he conveyed all of it without making any formal announcements or public remarks. Just cool, collected, and completely definitive action. The steely and unwavering determination of a father who will not fail to defend his children is guiding the next chapter of the monarchy, in addition to duty and tradition.